it's really interesting because we're entering what is clearly a remarkable and transitional and, at least in my hope, transformational moment in American history. The ideas that have governed us more or less continuously for the last 30 years, I think, are really dead ideas. The kind of free market fundamentalism we've had, the denigration of the role of government, the assumption of the absence of civic participation, the shredding of the social contract. All of these are things that, if some of you are old enough to remember some of the iconic writings of the 60s, on December 31st, I said, goodbye to all that. So I think we're entering a new moment. On the other hand, I think the character of the moment is yet to be defined. I think we really don't know what the new ideas, how things will shake down. I think lots and lots of things will change. I hope that people will have a sense of community and a sense of a social contract and a sense of caring about each other and a sense of a new role for the United States in the world, a new role for government, but we'll see how all of it works and plays out. One of the new ideas that's in Matt's book, and I'm very happy to say this, is the idea that, I'm not happy to say it actually, that one of the dead ideas is that our children will automatically do better than we do. This is an issue that Demos has worked on for a long time, since Tamara Drought wrote the book Strapped, that in fact coming of age and becoming an adult and being in a kind of a middle class adult is harder for young people than ever before, and this is a major challenge of public policy. For Demos, it's going to be a really, really interesting year. We were founded in 2000 in a kind of almost entirely oppositional moment where it seemed as though the hegemony of the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute was complete, and was sort of like for Demos and for CAP and some of the organizations that were founded around that time, all we needed to do, all we could do, was push back against the tide. Very different moment now. I think we have our ideas are relevant. People that we know will be in the administration and in Congress. Thinking big and thinking forward will be the order of the day, and I think we are in a moment for new ideas. So I just thought it was fabulous that Matt Miller will be our first speaker, but his second time. If Matt Miller was, I think, the third or fourth speaker ever in the Demos Forum series, way back when he wrote the 2% Solution, which was a terrific book, and this is a new fabulous addition to the public debate. The book is called The Tyranny of Dead Ideas. It is for sale, only a mere $25, kind of a recession price. This is very good. Matt will sign some, if that's okay. And let me introduce Matt biographically. He is a contributing editor of Fortune magazine, a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, an organization that we have very good and collegial relations with. Also a host of a program out of Los Angeles called Left, Right, and Center. He worked in the Clinton administration. He now consults for nonprofits, and his wife, Jody Greenstone Miller, is the business partner of a member of the Demos board, Amelia Warren-Tiagi. So we have lots and lots of connections with Matt. We're delighted to hear him. I have heard him speak many times, and I think he is one of the most interesting people around. So you're in for a treat. Matt Miller, welcome.
Thank you, Miles. It's a treat to be at Demos. It's a thrill to see two old high school friends who are here that I haven't seen in years, and we all recognize each other, which is saying something. And it's great to be at Demos, where so much has been done to try and lead the progressive revival that I hope, like Miles, that we're in a moment where a lot of these progressive goals can be realized. I agree with Miles. It's not clear yet which way the direction or the end of this journey is going to be, but in crisis there's opportunity. So I think while it's a scary moment for lots of families and for the country, it's also a really hopeful moment because of Obama and his team coming in. And Demos has been a leader in recent years in seeding the ideas that are going to make a difference over the next period. And if you're new to Demos, I really urge you to look into what Demos is doing and be supportive of it if you can, because we just need the constant flow of ideas to fuel what the new regime is going to try and do to make a difference. I recall Miles was talking about when I was here for the 2% Solution, I remember it was the first week that that book came out in the end of 2003, and on the same day I spoke to a business audience at the Harvard Club Midtown, and then came down to Demos to talk to the more progressive side of things down here. And I remember that book was about how to take 2 cents on the national dollar, 2% of GDP, which is a very big sum of money, and use it to get universal health coverage and a living wage and hire teachers for over $100,000 for urban schools, et cetera, but do that in a way that I was arguing conservatives and liberals could love. And when I went to the Harvard Club for the businessmen for lunch, businessmen, men and women, they said, we agree we ought to do this kind of stuff, but how do we know that if we put up the money, the liberals will do the systemic reforms you're talking about, to spend the money wisely? And I thought, well, that's a fair question. We have to have that conversation. When I came down to Demos, the questions in the question period was 2%. What a great way to frame it so it sounds like a small way to get us all that money. But why do we have to do these systemic reforms you're talking about to spend it wisely? So there's always, this is what life is like in the radical center, which I've been accused of belonging to, which was a phrase actually I was sorry that I used last night. I had the great opportunity to do the Colbert Report, which was really a treat to be skewered so exquisitely. And at one point, it's actually very funny because they give you, this is the first time I've done that, they give you, somebody comes by when you're waiting in the green room to go on, and they say, here's some of the questions that the writers and he have cooked up that they might use, not saying they will, but they might use to skewer you, just so you're not totally caught off guard. And there were things like, why should we get rid of the old ideas if the new ideas suck? and even if the old ideas don't work, don't we need to continue them out of a respect for tradition? And it kind of went on from there. And at one point, because the book has is a little bit ideologically eclectic, as you'll see in a minute, he's like, what are you? And I said, I'm a Democrat. And he goes, well, how do you describe your ideology? And I said, well, I'm an economically rational liberal, or some people have said radical centrist. He said, radical centrist? Isn't that like being a take no prisoners pussy? And I thought, and that's how he ends the segment. That's my dead idea, he says, and thank you, Matt Miller. So anyway, it was a treat, and so now I've got all these emails this morning from friends saying, I think, take no prisoners pussy is what you should really be calling yourself. And so anyway, so that's what you're in for. Sorry for the off-color remarks for some people. This is not. But obviously, we're here at an auspicious moment. There's an economic crisis. There's a new administration. We just had Obama yesterday confirming what everyone knew, which is we're going to run trillion-dollar deficits for the next few years, which is kind of extraordinary in our history, and I think totally necessary right now. We're on a cusp of a moment where I think there's a chance for us to rethink a lot of the old ways of doing business. I think it's urgent that we rethink this if we're not only going to get through this current economic crisis, but even the bigger challenges that loom ahead in terms of globalization and rapid technological change and the impact that they're having. It's also a moment when the world is watching. It's actually curious. I didn't expect, but we just sold the rights to this book in China. And China's had some interest in capitalism facing its comeuppance, and what are the consequences of that, and what does it mean for things. And I was just informed that the translation of the title in Chinese comes to "Do not let the demoted ideas control your world." So that's what the Chinese version is going to be. So anyway, at this hour, I am hoping with this book to try and move the debate toward an urgent rethinking of a lot of old ways of doing business. And since I make my living partly as a management consultant, I thought it'd be fitting to share a kind of whirlwind tour of the book via a kind of parody of Consultant Speaks, so we can have a little fun while we're also dissecting the future of capitalism. So I'm going to hit you with 3 facts, 4 forces, 6 dead ideas, and 7 destined ideas that are going to replace them. That adds up to 20 things. That sounds like a lot. Most people can't remember a 10-digit phone number about 30 seconds after it's been given to you by information, but I'm telling you this will be easy. You don't need to take notes. It's all in the book, and you won't want to miss the book, because the richness of that material, even if you get the overview, is something I hope you'll want to engage in, and I can't begin to do justice to all that, obviously, in the talk. So you'll have to read the whole thing, or at least buy it, which is what my publisher says is the most of that I can ask. So think of this as a whirlwind tour. We'll have what we'll do is I'll kind of give you a very quick once over, and then we can go deeper wherever you want in the question and answer period. So let me start with my 3 facts. The way I frame this is that 3 facts are now poised to shape our economic life for a generation. First, thanks to global competition and rapid technological change, America is about to face its severest threat, its economy, in nearly a century. Second, political and business leaders are doing next to nothing to help us prepare to cope with this. And third, that's because our entire economic and political culture is in the grip of a series of what I call dead ideas about the way a modern economy should work. So the book's about the threat now posed to individuals, companies, and the country by the things we think we know, and by the new and surprising ways of thinking that are destined to replace them so that America can continue to prosper. Now, what do I mean by dead idea? By that I mean a conventional wisdom, a kind of deeply ingrained conventional wisdom that over the decades really has built up, especially among policymakers, business leaders, professionals, media observers, opinion leaders generally, that while again the view of the American economy is hardly monolithic, there's a sort of set of core premises that our country and economy operate on that I think are dated, and so these dead ideas are truly holding us back. I think that the economic crisis we're in now, while it presents an opportunity to rethink some of these things, it's not clear yet whether we will, because while there's clearly seen to be an urgent need for the government to take greater action and play a greater role in the economy, at least temporarily, I think it's not yet clear, and a lot will depend on Obama's leadership and the rest of our followership, as to whether this becomes a defining moment that then reshapes a lot of the old ways of doing business, or instead we put a patch on some things over a couple of years and still go back to the same way of doing things that is going to leave us even more vulnerable over the next decade. Now, what I think is going to help force this rethinking is a set of what I think of as 4 forces that are set to accelerate in the next decade. They're going to come together and create a pressure and a climate that's going to make us rethink these things even beyond what the current crisis is providing. Here's those 4 forces. The first is what I call white-collar anxiety, and by that I'm referring to the way that jobs further up the income scale are going to become increasingly vulnerable to competition from developing nations that are rising, like China and India. So we've had a tough enough time maintaining a consensus for economic change, technological change, or open markets, even up to this point when it's been mostly lower-level service jobs and blue-collar jobs that have faced these threats from offshoring. As we move into an era now where more and more traditional white-collar jobs like doctors, financial analysts, engineers, lawyers, can be done as easily from India or elsewhere as be done in the United States. Even if the jobs don't move offshore, and they won't all move offshore, good estimates are that up to 40 million jobs out of about 140 million in the economy may be vulnerable to this kind of competition. And that's going to place an effective wage cap on a lot of different kinds of work that haven't been vulnerable to this competition before. What's going to happen when an entirely new swath of American workers, including people who are more politically potent and powerful, start to face this kind of downward mobility in ways that we've never seen before? That's an important question. The second force is what I call the rush for the exits. And by that I mean the desire by corporations to basically get out of the healthcare and pension business. And from the business point of view, there's something understandable about this because those costs are rising in ways that are really hurting their own competitiveness. Remember, healthcare used to be 2% or 5% of GDP 30, 35 years ago. Now it's 17% of GDP and rising. Companies are having a hard time bearing this burden. The same thing with pensions. The problem is that business executives act as if an exit strategy on benefits is sort of their only objective. But what's going to happen to millions of American families if companies pull out and they're left to the whirlwind? This rush to the exits is, again, another huge force at work right now. The third is what I call the gray boomer fiscal squeeze. And by that I mean the way that 76 million baby boomers are about to hit their rocking chairs, starting now, basically. And that's going to double the number of people on Social Security and Medicare. We already have $50 trillion in unfunded liabilities in these and related retirement programs. So what's going to happen to, how will the U.S. government cope with this And how will even big government, we talk about big government, or critics of government talk about big government. Big government's going to be strapped by this. We're already running deficits of $1 trillion on the front edge of this. How is government going to do anything else but pay for the health care and pensions of retiring seniors? And what's going to be left for all the other things we expect government to do, from education to policing to border control to military to research and development to NASA, you name it. And how will government do that without raising taxes to levels that really hurt the economy? And if government doesn't step in and do these things, then what will happen? So the gray boomer fiscal squeeze creates real urgency, because this is happening now. And then the fourth force that I think is really important in understanding the dynamics at work is the rise of what I call extreme inequality. And by that I mean, even as the other forces I'm talking about and the current economic crisis as well are leaving most American families really struggling, you've got a sliver at the very top that, as you know, has been pulling away at levels that haven't been seen since the 1920s. And this is not just the result of some rewards from free market behavior. We know from reading the headlines every week that this is too often the result of rigged systems that are actually rewarding mediocrity or failure rather than excellence in the market. It's hard for a week to go by when you don't have a CEO who presided over a 50% plunge in the stock or the wreckage of the company, walking away with $100 million. Hedge fund managers who don't beat the S&P routinely make that much in a single year. You've got subprime bankers who made millions, tens of millions of dollars. There's several thousand people who helped create this economic crisis who have retired to their country club while the rest of the country is holding the bag. And I ask, how far can the ubiquity of the undeserving rich go before it becomes so corrosive that it wrongly sparks a backlash against capitalism that discredits the system altogether? So I think that these forces are going to come together. They're going to collide in the coming years, building on the current economic crisis in a way that's really going to put all the fundamental questions up for grabs on the economy in ways that we haven't seen since the post-World War II period, when the architects of the post-war system sat down to try and chart a course beyond depression and war. And it creates all these big questions. Can middle-class societies be sustained in an age of globalization? Can democracy really work viably in an era of such extreme inequality and a kind of succession at the top? What's going to happen to the hopes of the developing world if the rich world, countries like the US and Europe and the wealthier nations, are gripped by anxiety and their workers want to close the borders to the goods and services provided by developing countries, which if they can't sell to us, will mean that they're doomed to dollar-a-day poverty. So I think that the coalition of these forces is going to reveal that a lot of our premises have been dangerously misguided and are going to force us to rethink. And I think the only way we get past this is by urgently rethinking 6 dead ideas that I think lay at the heart of our problem. Now, I should say, I'm focused on 6 dead ideas in this book. There are probably dozens in our public life that need revisiting. There's probably hundreds in your personal life or your professional life that you can think of while I'm talking. We've got a website and a contest at mattmilleronline.com where you can nominate your own dead ideas and win everlasting recognition and other exciting prizes for those things. But I'm focused on 6 that I think are sort of in the critical path between where we are now and the kinds of changes we need to make. Let me sketch them, give you a feel for them briefly, and we can pursue them more if you want in Q&A. The first dead idea is what I call the kids will earn more than we do. Now, people think this is not an optimistic dead idea to want to explode, but the idea of upward mobility in America is basically at the heart of the American dream. It's been the foundational ethic of our country since we were the classless society being started that de Tocqueville admired. We didn't take the titles of the aristocracies. We didn't have a king. And the whole ethic of upward mobility, from iconic figures like Benjamin Franklin to Horatio Alger to Abe Lincoln, obviously, he's sort of the poster boy for upward mobility and the amazingness of America in that regard, through literature. Jay Gatsby, the self-invented man, the way we look at people like Ronald Reagan to Bill Clinton to Barack Obama, who come out of nowhere and achieve remarkable things in America. That's been part of the fabric of what it means to be in America, and yet when you look at the most recent research, it's a stunning but underappreciated fact that 100 million Americans now live in families that are earning less than their parents did at a similar age. You have to let that sink in. That's up to 1 in 3 families now facing that situation, and that is before we face the full impact of economic integration with developing the rising developing nations like India and China. So I think that situation, by any objective assessment, is going to become more serious. So I think the idea that the kids will earn more than we do, which has been in some ways essential to the American spirit, is at risk. There's no question. As Tamara's work and other work by Demos in recent years has helped to point out. And I think one of the ways that our belief in this, or 3 ways that our belief in this has held us back, is that it's given us a sort of a wrong way of thinking about certain things. I go into a lot of detail about this in the book, but I think that the main point I would stress for now is that by having such a firm faith in the ever-rising tide, we have overestimated the power of the individual in America to control his own economic destiny. You know, in America, the general ethic has been, if you're, there's so much opportunity to be had, that if you can't make it in America, it's probably your fault, not the country's. And I think that the death of this idea is the sole measure of American progress, because so many external forces are now at work that are shaping the economic destiny of a larger portion of the population, is going to force us to rebalance our sense of what the community needs to do and what the individual needs to do to assure opportunity and security in a wealthy nation like the U.S. So that's the first dead idea. The second dead idea is that free trade is good no matter how many people it hurts. Now, I am not a protectionist. I don't think the answer is protectionism, but I think economists in both parties have done us a grave disservice by politically overselling the benefits of trade and not being honest enough and thorough enough in their articulation of the downside and the millions of people who are affected negatively by trade, and the things that the country should do as a result to make sure that trade doesn't decimate large portions of the population. And I go into great detail then about where the economic science, what it does and doesn't let you say, and the 2 main claims by economists about free trade, which is that globalization is, that free trade is good, no matter how many people it hurts, and that globalization, what we're going through now, is just another form of free trade. Both of those statements are not economically scientific statements by the standards of the profession. And the economists have been hyping the benefits of trade, I think, largely for a reason we don't appreciate. I think that the redeeming, if I take the economists to task in this book, I think their redeeming secret of the way they've been politicizing this debate is that they are hiding some of the truth about trade from us because they don't want us to have a protectionist backlash that will make it impossible for the poor countries around the world to rise, because that will be the result if we shut down our borders. And so that's sort of the dirty little secret. They're a little bit like the Jack Nicholson character in A Few Good Men, who basically feel like we can't handle the truth about trade. And I think that it's time that economists not only were more honest about that, but instead of talking about a more robust safety net as an afterthought, made it essential and the sort of leading piece of the way they talk about what we need to do to make the world safe for more open trade in a world where more people are going to be vulnerable. So that's the second dead idea. The third dead idea I call your company should take care of you. And that's the whole employer-based system of healthcare, mostly healthcare benefits, but also pension benefits to some extent, that we in the United States uniquely have. No other advanced nation runs its welfare state largely through private corporations. And this is an idea that, in each of these chapters, by the way, I do a kind of mini biography of the dead idea. So where did it come from? Why did it make sense for a long time? What's changed in terms of the radical changes in circumstances that make it not sensible today, and why the persistence of these ideas is now posing grave dangers and consequences for our country. And the idea of doing this through employers, it's often said that it happened as a result of World War II, when there was a wage and price freeze imposed by FDR, and benefits were exempt from that. Companies started offering benefits to compete for talent. After the war, the feds came in and ratified that arrangement with a big tax subsidy, and the system grew from there. And now, as you know, most of us get our health care from our employers. Well, that is true so far as it goes, but it's misleading because it makes it sound like our massive corporate welfare state was actually an accidental byproduct of wartime pricing policy, when the true story, which I think is more interesting, really dates to the early 1900s in the era of the first backlash against the excesses of industrial capitalism, when you had unions beginning to form. In Europe, socialism was being kicked off, and the business community in the U.S. and their conservative political allies came together, not around a table, but came together and effectively said, you know, we got to keep a lid on this somehow, or else the unions in the state are going to grow. Let's offer benefits and provide some kind of more measure of security at big companies to our employees, so that they don't feel, it'll sort of diffuse the political energy that would lead to more unions in the greater state. And so that system grew, and then grew again for the reasons we just discussed after World War II. And it really was sustainable thanks to the fact that America was so on top economically in the world. You know, when we emerged from World War II, we were dominant. The rest of the world was getting off its knees, and it was possible for companies to pass on through higher prices the cost of the American welfare state. And at a time when you had a single breadwinner working 30 years at one company, and most people worked at these big companies, and the families were sort of supported by a single breadwinner, maybe that made sense. But as we all know, the world has changed dramatically since then. People changed jobs a million times. Healthcare costs, which were minor for corporations then, have soared, as we all know, over the last 30 years. And so today, putting this stuff on corporations is killing the competitiveness of these global companies, and it's leaving, you know, 50 million uninsured, 30 million underinsured. All the rest of us worried that we're, you know, a layoff away from being naked on insurance, and we know that we're an illness away from going bankrupt in many cases. So it no longer makes sense, yet it persists. It's sort of the way we've always done things, and that's a dead idea that I think a business in particular needs to take the lead on revisiting, and we can talk about the challenges there. The fifth dead idea is schools are a local matter. And by that I'm referring to the radical tradition of local control and local funding of schools in the United States. Again, we're unique in this way. Only in the U.S. do 15,000 local school districts essentially call the shots for what education should look like. And also that the funding base is so entirely based on local property taxes and then assorted state taxes as well. The federal government only contributes 9 cents on the national dollar for spending in K-12 education. And please know, I'm all for parental involvement in school and a local sense of ownership and direction of a school. Obviously, you can't have a good school without that. But the way that we have set up our school financing system dooms 10 million poor children from the get-go. There's dramatic funding disparities between rich and poor districts in the United States. In a town like Chicago, you can go to a school that's downtown, that's a dilapidated building with sewage oozing through the thing, with mostly rookie, untrained, unqualified teachers. And then you go 15 minutes down the road to a suburb. You know, in the Chicago school may be spending $10,000 a pupil. You go 15 minutes down the road to the suburb, and you'll find the best teachers in the state. You'll find clean, sparkling facilities with Olympic-style swimming pools and Broadway-style theaters, and they're spending $18,000 or $20,000 a student. That's entirely a function of our system of local control, which brings with it local funding. So I think unless we get, and it made perfect sense in the 19th century, because in the 19th century, we weren't all segregated into these different taxing districts by wealth. You had the rich families on the hill, you had the merchants somewhere living in the middle class, and you had poor folks, but they were all living in a community that basically the property tax was the main form of taxation because that was the main form of wealth. The schools were created, and all the kids had access to the same public service. It was a progressive way to fund education today. Now, this system, again, which no other advanced nation would tolerate in terms of its inequity, is dooming millions of poor children from the start, and I think it's a dead idea that has to go. The last dead idea is what I call money follows merit. And by this, I refer to the idea of economic meritocracy. And I think this is a dead idea that actually is not held by average people. I think it's a dead idea that may be more exclusively the preserve even of some of you in this room, which is that I think that one of the most cherished myths of the educated class in America is the idea that market capitalism is a meritocracy, that people basically end up economically where they deserve to. And I think that what we're going to see, we're already beginning to see what I think of as a revolt of the lower upper class against the undeserving ultra-rich. When you see all the enormous excesses at the top by folks who are clearly not meritorious in the sense that most of us would view merit as, you know, there's a huge vacuum of leadership among elites. You've got so many people who've made hundreds of millions of dollars looking out for themselves while their institutions fail. I'm arguing that the empathy the outrage that this arouses among the lower uppers, as I call them, and the realization that those who succeed in school and ace their SITs and go to good colleges and feel in that sense, in the kind of American meritocratic way, that they are deserving of their share of the best material rewards that American society has to offer. The fact that those folks who have been doing that for so long now realize there's this other class above them that's gotten there in a way that doesn't seem to honor those values is going to create a greater empathy for the far greater amount of folks below the professional class that is being buffeted much more harshly by economic forces beyond their control, and will help the lower uppers become a constituency for the kind of changes I think we'll need in the years ahead. So those are the 6 dead ideas. The kids will learn more than we do. Free trade is good no matter how many people get hurt. Your company should take care of you. Taxes, oh, I'm sorry, I missed one. Taxes hurt the economy and they're always too high. This is in middle age, you lose your glasses and you lose track of your dead ideas. I forgot. This is the most important one, the one that Stephen Colbert dismissed in a nanosecond just last night, which is that taxes hurt the economy and they're always too high. Now, this is just a simple factual thing. We're cutting taxes now, obviously, because we're trying to fight off a recession. Once we get past this recession, there is no question that taxes are going to be higher over the next decade than they are today, because we are going to retire the baby boom. We're going to double the number of people, as I said, on Social Security and Medicare. There is no way the math works at current levels of taxation, and as John McCain's top economic advisors say on the record in my book, taxes are going up no matter who is in power in the next decade. Now the good news is we're not going to become France and Sweden, although to a demos crowd that may be the bad news. We're not going to become France, but we're not going to become France and Sweden. We'll be somewhere in between where we are today and where they are. And the other good news, which is never discussed in the debate, is that the economy will be fine. There's this myth that if we go up at all in terms of our taxes, that the economy will collapse. And yet, as I try and show in the book, all history, our own history, as well as the experience of other nations, remember, we're not going to get to France or Sweden. You see, I've got that sort of grilled into my talking points on this, because you speak to conservative audiences like this who you want to persuade, and the first thing you get is, you're talking about France or Sweden. So forgive me for my France and Sweden phobia. There's a lot of good things about France and Sweden. I can say that here. But we won't become France or Sweden, and the economy will be fine. And that's an undiscussable fact in U.S. politics today for reasons that we know. The Republicans have ridden the tax issue since 1980 under Ronald Reagan, and they don't want to let go. Even though their own thinkers and anyone who looks at the numbers and what's coming knows that they can't, they may try for a while, but you just can't keep talking about cutting taxes because they're going up. And I don't want them to go up, by the way. I mean, I wish it weren't true that they were going to up, but as a wise man once said, if you have no alternative, you have no problem. So the real challenge is to use this, because they are going to go up, the real debate needs to shift to how are we going to tax ourselves, how are we going to reform the tax system so that when we do inevitably rise, we do it in a way that's least bad for the economy. And I think that means we're going to end up taxing things like payrolls and corporations less, and we need to tax dirty energy and consumption more. And we can talk about that if you want. So anyway, those are the 6 dead ideas now finally cataloged. And let me give you a very brief, do I still have a couple minutes? A very brief look at the destined ideas that I say are going to replace them. We can talk about any of this more if you want in Q&A. The way I think of this is I'm actually, in the previous book I wrote, I was actually trying to persuade people that this is what we should do. In this book, I actually think while it's urgent that we rethink this stuff, and that we have a unique opportunity to do that now with Obama here, and the new forces, the new political forces, I actually think this is more like a moment like 1928, where if you would ask people in 1928, average folks, should the federal government have a big role, have some role in making sure that people don't end up in poverty in old age? And the answer would have been no. In 1928, the ethic was rugged individualism, and the idea that the federal government should play so proactive a role in providing some kind of retirement security was considered beyond the pale. By 1940, it was considered common sense. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying we have to go through a depression to get that. I don't believe that's going to happen. I don't believe what we're going through is going to become anything like that. although I will depressingly note that it took the worst economic crisis since the Depression to get a progressive like Barack Obama elected president. So, but I do think that the ideas I'm talking about, which I'll lay out, that I call these destined ideas, may seem a little paradoxical or even taboo right now, but I think when we look back in around 2020, it will seem obvious in retrospect, or common sense in retrospect, that this is the way that history was headed. And I think the challenge for us is to how urgently we can force this rethinking so that we can avoid more pain and suffering along the way before these changes take place. So here are tomorrow's destined ideas. Only government can save business, and we've already started some of that, as you've seen. But I'm not really referring to massive nationalization of banks and the current emergency interventions. I'm really talking about the healthcare and pension area, where only government can do what it needs to do to make sure we have a decent society and relieve business of a burden I think it was never properly meant to bear. The second is only business can save liberalism. Now that may be a challenging thought for some in this audience, and by that I mean that there are two major sectors, healthcare and education, in our economy that are radically inefficient, where we spend a lot more than other wealthy nations and we get a lot less out of it. And if we don't change that equation in the decade ahead, there will be no money available to do the kinds of things that liberals like me want to do for those who are less advantaged. So for example, 10 years from now, the debates we're going to be having over the budget aren't about how to fight off Newt Gingrich-style cuts that seem crazy. It will be, the trade-offs will be every dollar that we don't need to spend in Medicare for quality health care, and right now we're spending twice as much per capita as other countries without any better outcomes and having 50 million uninsured. Every dollar that we don't need to spend for quality health care and Medicare is a dollar we won't have available for a poor child. That's what the trade-offs are going to look like. And unless we re-engineer, there's sort of two ways to try and address this. One is, which is the traditional way, is to just say, all right, we got to spend more money on health care and education, or we have to do more Pell Grants, or we have to do more student loans. And those are all fine as stopgaps. But all those things really do, in education, for example, is ratify the tuition increases that private and state universities want to do. You pour more Pell Grants in, you load up our kids with more debt, prices continue to rise because the market will bear it. And so unless we find a way to re-engineer the cost structure of the health and education sectors, we will not solve the problem I'm talking about. And I believe that in our society, business, entrepreneurial innovation, and that energy comes from the business sector. I'm not talking about Bush's privatization agenda. I'm talking about things like, if you're familiar with the minute clinics that have been in a lot of the big discount stores, the healthcare clinics that are in the side of the store where a mom can go with a kid who has a sore throat or a strep throat, needs a vaccine, kind of basic things, warts, all the kinds of basic procedures that if you go to a doctor's office to do it, or God forbid to the emergency room to do it, costs a fortune and costs the system a fortune, and it's being offered in hundreds of locations now for very low prices. Now these are kind of radical, these are challenges to the healthcare business model. I think it's things like that in healthcare and education that liberals need to be open to and to encourage if we're going to bend the cost line in these sectors in ways that make sure that there's money available for the priorities we have. So, only government can save business, only business can save liberalism, only higher taxes can save the economy and the planet. Very popular, you can imagine, with some audiences. But for the reasons I said, we've got so many unfunded liabilities, and that's before we even do things for people who aren't senior citizens, that we're going to have higher taxes. And if we use this opportunity right, by raising taxes on energy, for example, it'll be ways to achieve our environmental goals, our fiscal goals, our budget goals, our national security goals, all the other good things that we like. The next destined idea, only the lower upper class can save us from inequality. I hinted at that before, but I think that the lower uppers are a ripe constituency to move what I think of as a comeuppance agenda for some of the undeserving ultra-rich. I'm not against rich people, I'm an ardent capitalist. I hope that's clear. But I think there are ways that we can ask those at the tippy top to contribute a little more in ways that will ease the inequality that we're facing today, while also helping to fund the kind of security agenda that I'm talking about for everyone else. Only better living can save sagging paychecks. That's about why we're going to have to look beyond just the consumer society to find meaning and comfort in an age when more people are going to face wage stresses. And I think there are movements underway already in that regard. And I think that we're going to see tons of that in that ethic develop in the era ahead. Only a dose of nationalization can save local schools. By that I mean the bigger federal role in school finance and in standards. I happen to like Richard Nixon's almost adopted plan from 35 years ago to take the feds from 9% of spending on schools to about 25 or 30%, which would enable a lot of great things to happen that can't happen today. And then finally, only lessons from abroad can save American ideals. And here my point is, I think that we've developed this snobbery in the U.S. and a kind of parochialism in the last few decades where if it wasn't invented here, we don't think there's something to learn from. You know, in a lot of the, especially in the political debate in Washington, you know, if somebody says, let's look at what Singapore is doing on pensions, or let's look at what Finland has done on teacher training, you know, the answer is, what are you? This is some small frozen tundra or a tiny Asian benevolent dictatorship. We're America. And I think that's, that is going to have to fall in the next few years, and that all of us can help make it fall, because there's a lot we have to learn, and we used to. This is not an ahistorical thing. We designed our university system largely after what we admired and what the Germans had done. We designed our governmental institutions, except for the monarchy, based on what we thought the British had done that was smart. So it's part of the American tradition, and we're going to have to revive that and get past our parochialism if we're going to renew our commitment to the ideals of equality and opportunity and security and upward mobility, which other countries now beat us at, which is kind of stunning. There's so many countries now where upward mobility, if you're a poor kid, is greater now than it is in the U.S., but that ought to shock us and shame us. So those are the destined ideas. And let me wrap up by saying I think there's a real chance at this moment, because of the crisis and because of the interesting nature of our new leaders, to really seize this time to rethink. And I think everyone has a role in helping make that happen, because leaders can't lead unless followers are ready to follow. And some of the directions we need to go are challenging. So it's incumbent on all of us as citizens now to make the world safe for our leaders, to pick up some of these new banners and help move us in this way. I really think that we're in a situation, we're in a race between the tendency of capitalism in this era to wreck so many lives that it loses standing with the public, and our ability to look in a new way at the facts, wake up, and rethink if we're going to make the world safe for American capitalism, for an updated version of American capitalism in the 21st century. Thank you.
You want to just go ahead and call
Sure.
on people?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've got a good half hour.
Questions? Yes.
So your first two good ideas, the one about our kids, thank you. Our kids will be less rich than we are, and secondly, trade is not.
Not your kids. Your kids will do it.
My kids are going to be perfect because they're not born yet. But so both of those make sense as a problem in an American citizen context. But if I view myself as a global citizen of the world, I mean, kids in India are a lot richer now than they were, or have much greater prospects than they did even 10 years ago, because of free trade, because of our shifting expectations. As a global citizen, why do I care about those two problems?
As a global citizen, on the trade problem in general, if you're just a global citizen, you may not. I think from a benevolent deity's view of what's happening in the world, the rise of the developing nations is a wonderful thing for humanity, obviously. And yet that's inevitably going to put stresses on a lot of citizens in wealthy nations. I think the reason you should care, let me amend this, the reason you need to care is that I think there's a real threat of a protectionist backlash now because of the anxiety people face. And so unless we really force these issues to the top of the agenda, I mean, we can't pass a free trade agreement now. Democrats will tell you, I quote Rahm Emanuel in the book, there's a scene where he's sitting down with the Business Roundtable. This is after the 2006 election where he helped engineer the victory. And he's having, a lunch with the Business Roundtable, big CEOs from about 20 companies. And they're talking about how, free trade, the Democrats are too protectionist, there's this whole free trade thing. Well, how can we make progress? They're saying to him, when CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, passed with just barely passed, and with only a handful of votes in the House, and those are a couple tiny countries that really aren't going to, overturn the American economy. And Rahm put his fork down and said, you guys have a economic problem, well, I got a political problem. Unless you make my people feel more secure, you're never going to pass another trade agreement up here at all. And so those who care, and that's really what I was trying to say about the economists, I think, who actually want trade to remain open so that the rest of the world can achieve its human potential, know that there's a looming backlash because of this if we don't get past a bunch of these dead ideas, especially in the way we provide economic security for folks. Yes, sir.
Many of your ideas can be quite disruptive to society, to the government, and they bad, and we have no way of managing it. So how do you propose that we educate people to be able to actually navigate through changes that appear to be quite disruptive, even though they're in the best interest of everyone?
Well, it's funny because some of the things, I think the climate we're in is disruptive, but at least I like to think that a lot of the ideas I'm talking about should be self-evidently in the interest of folks. The main example is healthcare and business. I do not understand, and I spend time in my consulting life talking with business leaders a lot, and I do not understand why business leaders cling to their role in the American welfare state instead of saying, you know what, we need government to help do this, and we'll be a constituency for what government needs to do to make sure we can pay for it in a different way than putting it all on us. And I think the barrier there, it's less about disruption to them, because I think if you sort of shook business leaders and said, do you really want to be in this business and do you want to bear this burden? And they thought there wouldn't be public flack from critics who saying that business is trying to dump, their obligations, which is a criticism they face. Then I think they'd say, tell us how we can help transfer this burden in ways that work for everyone. But I think one of the things we can all do is to make the world safe for that conversation. Again, the business leaders, when it comes to healthcare, feel a little bit trapped because they are going to face, they think they're going to face tremendous criticism if they try and lead a discussion about getting past this. But it ought to be in their self-interest. So just one example.
What we're talking about is
A change in,
business model.
yes. Now, there's other ones. Obviously, one of the reasons dead ideas persist, which I talk about in the book, is that powerful constituencies develop around the status quo. This is classic politics. So when I give a speech to the School Board Association about why we should abolish local school boards, they don't stand up and give a standing ovation. And there's 95,000 of them. Every one of them wants to run for higher office. They view their school board as a stepping stone. And there are some wonderful people who serve on school boards. I know that, and they're especially in smaller communities. They may be a great example of small D democracy in action. But especially in the big urban areas that I've done a lot of reporting on, I think they're the most dysfunctional, corrupted systems that are essentially controlled by the adults of all the adult unions and adult commercial interests that are serving the district and getting money from the district. And all of this while everybody is saying to each other it's all about the kids. I mean, it's a little bit depressing. And again, that's a political challenge, but we got to start the conversation, and everyone has to play a part. Sir, back there. Sorry, come to you a sec.
You put out a lot of numbers, and some of them you might want to comment on in greater depth. You say there are a lot of undeserving ultra-rich, but you didn't say what percentage of the ultra-rich you felt were undeserving. You said that a child in a poor school or poor neighborhood in Chicago gets $10,000 spent on him per school year. That comes to $10 per student hour in front of a teacher. Why is that a small amount? You have to spend twice as much to get a better effect? And the third thing, which was the first thing that you actually said, was, if I understood correctly, 1/3 of us in the United States are in families that are worse off than the families that we came from, which means that 2/3 of us are in families that are better off. Could you comment on these quantitative elements?
Yes. My research shows that 18% of rich people are undeserving. I'm kidding. I have no idea what percent of the. I'm not against wealth. Please no. I don't know. All I know is the frequency, what seems to me like the ubiquity that we're seeing of examples of people who are getting rich in ways, extremely rich, in ways that I think sort of are contrary to the values of market capitalism. I think is very corrosive and destructive for the system as a whole, because it will spark a backlash when it looks like there's just people out to feather their own nest, getting theirs, while the rest of the country is suffering. So that's the point I make about that. I can't quantify the deserving question. On the dollars in kids, I don't have a number for what it takes to adequately educate a kid. But the main thing I do focus on is if you compare high poverty urban areas in particular and their nearby affluent suburbs, I believe, and all the research shows, that teacher quality is the key factor in terms of a kid's success. And we know it is. Researchers of every stripe agree that it's the key thing that can offset the disadvantage that the most unlucky kids in the country come into the world with because of their family situation. And while money is not the only answer, there's no question that the best teachers in the country gravitate to the suburbs of the country, and that we're relying essentially on the missionary plan to staff the high poverty schools in urban areas where 10 million kids are now languishing. And again, while money's not the only answer, in the suburban schools they pay more, they've got easier to teach kids, and the kids and they've got much nicer working conditions. And the pay more in the working conditions are a direct function of money. And so I think that if we're serious about trying to give poorer kids a chance, there has to be something done to offset the labor market disadvantage that the suburban schools now enjoy through a system of localized funding that is dooming these poor kids. Again, I'm not a person who says money's the only answer, but it's a piece of it. The 1/3, you're right. 2/3 are doing better than their family did. That's great. I'm worried that the 1/3 is just the beginning of a widening wedge, because we're already seeing this 1/3 at a time when we don't have the full economic integration with China, India, and the other rising nations. So I think that number will get to 1 and 2 very quickly, and then I think you're really going to start to see more people less hopeful, and it'll change the dynamics in the culture. Ma'am.
I have three components. As we restructure our employment economy, what will be the new drivers? And then, I don't know if you're familiar with Jeremy
Rifkin and his end of jobs, what you feel the future of jobs, will we have enough jobs? And thirdly, I think I heard you say that we have a $50 trillion unfunded liability, and I wondered whether you discounted the Social Security Trust Fund.
I'm a Jeremy Rifkin, but I haven't read the End of Jobs. I don't think we'll have it. I think there's been this sort of fear periodically in U.S. economic history that we're not going to have enough jobs. I always think that that's wrong, that there's going to be, even while we're facing these challenges, we're on the threshold of huge technological innovations, all these life sciences and medical innovations. So once we get through this rough patch, I think that it's going to be things will be very strong. But I think the question is how the growth that we're inevitably going to have, how equitably it will be shared, and whether there will be a rising tide that lifts all boats, as was the case in the past, or whether there's going to be a lot more challenges on that, which I think is what we're facing now.
So what will drive that growth? What will drive the economy? We could do all the infrastructure, and yet the malls won't be built because people won't buy. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Movies won't be built because people won't go.
I'm not smart enough to predict which sectors are going to be the things that kick things off. I do think that the opportunity for productivity improvements in healthcare and education, which are areas that I said are totally bloated now and ripe for reinvention, is going to be at least part of the areas where there's going to be a lot of entrepreneurial activity to try and both address these problems and people seizing business opportunities to get rich that are going to create a lot of jobs. But I'm not a job sector forecaster, so I don't know the full answer. Ma'am?
Not only the quality of the teacher, it's also class.
Professional development. A teacher's not going to be very good with 40 kids, as good as she is with 20 kids, or he is. Perhaps in your book you have you've talked about the numbers in the corporations. I heard an analysis last year that the corporations are complaining about health care, but in fact, the percent that they are paying, the amount that they are paying, has leveled off over the years. And they really are, it's a public relations thing that they're complaining. They really don't want to get out of it. Maybe you have some more recent numbers about the cost to corporations of healthcare.
Yeah, I don't think it's a PR thing. I think there's a couple of things that are going on. One is that companies are, because of the soaring cost of healthcare, they've been requiring employees to pay a higher percentage of the premiums than they used to.
Right.
But that is not inconsistent with the fact that the price to the corporation has risen enormously. So, for example, the company used to pay 80% of the premium, they charge the worker 20%. As costs soar, if the company's paying 70%, they've raised to 30%.
The family, the 70% is a much bigger number than the old 80% number. So corporations aren't lying about that. That's true. And when they talk about, I think that to me the problem is they're not more open to trying to get out of it for different reasons that are partly ideological and partly PR fears. That if no CEO wants to be the first one somehow to say we've got to get out of the healthcare business because they think the unions will attack them or the employees will feel like they're being betrayed. So it's going to take safety in numbers for a bunch of business leaders to come together on that, and I'm hoping to promote that with the book.
It's my pleasure to meet you, Mr. Miller. And I don't see too many international students here, and I'm one of them, but would you so kind to answer my question?
Where are you from?
Yeah,
Where are you studying?
I'm from China, and my major is mechanical engineering. And I'm...
What city?
What?
What city of China?
Shanghai. And I'm going to graduate from Columbia this coming Friday, and it's coming February. And
Perfect time to look for a job in the US.
Yeah, I know. But I do represent some people in this society, and those desperate international students, and those people who has an American dream. And I have heard your radio, and you said we have overestimated individuals' ability to choose their economic destiny. Have you said that?
To shape their economic destiny.
Yeah, and that made me a little desperate. And as for finding a job, I'm desperate too. And I just want to ask for the coming crisis and the impending Obama's stimulus package. Do you think our international students have any chance in this society, in this United States society? And
Yes.
What's your suggestion to us?
Sure, I think international students have a huge future in American society. So.
But I only had 90 days to. That's the policy.
Buy my
A job guarantee during the first year. I'm teasing, but have you seen there was a Hyundai commercial the other day when the football games were on last weekend that I thought was striking, where it said, you've believed in Hyundai, so Hyundai's going to believe in you. If you buy a Hyundai now and you lose your income over the next year, you can return the car. I thought that was sort of a stunning thing. That doesn't help you at all. I'm sorry. I don't know why I thought of that. But look, it's a tough time to look for a job now. But it'll change. But you may have to find a way to hang on for a while because it depends. I can't do a lot of personal counseling on your situation right now. But it depends on where you're looking and how quickly you need money to pay the rent. So. But generally, I'm very bullish, and America needs folks from everywhere to contribute.
Is he any good on bridges?
Huh? Is he any good on bridges? That's right. That's right. What kind of an engineer are you? Mechanical engineer?
Yeah. Last semester, I was doing internship for NTA.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a ton of money pouring into all these things very soon. So.
And I am going to terminate my student status, and so they can't. According to the policy, I can't work for them doing the volunteer there anymore.
That's crazy.
So I find another job.
Right.
Internship.
Well, I hope we'll figure out a way to solve that so you can contribute here soon. But
I
again,
do hope the American government can open something for me.
you're right. It's important. Over here?
Are you aware of the you aware of the New York State court case, Equity in Education, in fact, it was saying something like orientation of bad ideas that are coming, and the need for more functional thinking generally, which is part of an NGO group I represented. But the Equity in Education court case and movement, which is practically dead now because of the financial situation, but also that the G20 countries are also bringing up the need for a new global financial system and a rethinking generally of the UN, and the foreign policy establishment of the U.S. also is revisiting those things and then actually agreeing with you that we do need to have new ideas and visions for our local and global problems. And what do you think is the reason what we seem to maintain for so long, these outdated ideas? And do you think it's part of politics and power and ego?
I think it takes, I just think it takes an
to shake up these conventional wisdoms. And, you know, a blessing in disguise of the current crisis may be that it provides the impetus for the leadership from somebody like an Obama to help us rethink all this stuff, because, you know, there's a combination of the usual politics and the gridlock that builds up, and also there was a long time when the ideas worked, and then the constituencies build up, and then, you know, keeping these things in place long past where they make sense. And it also gets hard. People get stuck in a mindset. I think I think dead ideas apply in our personal life, and you know, we get stuck in old ways of thinking, and it often takes a crisis to jolt us out of it. So I hope that's what makes this a hopeful moment.
I wonder if you could elaborate on your tax proposal.
I think that we should basically be trying to do what different people have called the kind of swap of higher energy taxes for lower payroll taxes. You know, the Social Security Medicare taxes that are now, they started off at 2% in the early days. Now they're around 15% combined between the employer and employee. I think they discourage job growth. They place a bigger burden on most families now than income taxes do. They're kind of the stealth tax. And so we should have higher taxes on carbon-based fuels, much higher, and that will, and then offset that. You know, people talk about a carbon tax and dividend approach, where you raise the money from these higher carbon taxes and then give most of it back to people through the payroll tax rebates. I think corporate taxes should be lower in this age. We can broaden the base, but again, I think we want to encourage great companies to locate work in the United States, and I think that unduly high corporate taxes hurt workers, and in some audiences that's a tough sell, but that's my point of view. And I think that we'll take income taxes at the top toward what they were in the Clinton era, which was not inconsistent with dramatic economic growth. And most Republicans will tell you, thoughtful Republican economists will tell you, behind closed doors, that there was not some great deterrent to economic growth with marginal rates at the top at 39% instead of 35%. I don't think, however, that we should be taking marginal rates back above 50%, which I was concerned Obama had floated in the administration when he was talking about raising the payroll tax a lot as part of a Social Security fix. If you go back to 39 or 40% in the income tax rate and then raise the payroll tax higher, you start to put marginal taxes, especially if you have states with high taxes, way into the mid-50s again for entrepreneurs, and I think that I think is a mistake. So, and we'll need more like European-style consumption taxes, like the VAT. I think that's going to be in our future. Larry Summers, the new NEC guy, had a great line when he was I don't know when he was at Harvard, when he was Treasury Secretary, that says, "We don't have a VAT today." You know what I'm talking about, the value-added tax? We don't have a VAT today because conservatives fear it's a money. Conservatives think it's a money machine, and because liberals think it's regressive. He goes, "We will have a VAT when liberals realize it's a money machine and conservatives realize it's regressive." Isn't that a great line? Gentleman in the back, that's a great line.
Hi, for about 70, so I have an abiding interest in education, and we obviously have a real education crisis in this country in various ways. I was intrigued by a reference to the fact that Dick Nixon had supported a substantial increase in federal support I never thought much of Dick Nixon, frankly, but that's a good idea. Now,
He's looking like a great little president.
yeah, no question. I agree. You got a situation where in the New York City school systems and other urban school systems, you got a dropout rate of about 40%. If you increase, for example, the federal role in financing schools, are you going to help alleviate that problem, or those systemic problems in education that other things need to be done for?
It's never only money. I think that some money, and I think money tied to reforms and standards should be part of the fix, you know, as well as anyone.
Complicated things, and ultimately it depends on what happens in classrooms between teachers and students, but I think that we can do a lot to get the right teachers serving the right kids, which is very hard today, as the union leaders will be the first to admit, and that we can, start there and build on that to try and get folks where we need to go. I mean, I think the challenges in education are just enormous right now, and the stakes are so high, and I think even middle-class families don't realize how other nations are outperforming us and preparing to eat our lunch if we don't begin to take this more seriously. They're going to bring you a microphone. If people have to go, feel free to go.
You raised the term, I'm familiar with, it sounds like a nice colloquial term, followership. And it sounds both like it holds to a participatory democracy, also sounds totalitarian. Could you define what you mean by that?
Yeah, I just think in a democracy, I think that the way it works is kind of a symbiotic dance between leaders and followers. By followers, I mean citizens. But if somebody's called a leader, I'm calling the rest of us followers. And so it's nothing fancier than that in terms of what I mean. And I think one of the political leaders are a great reflection of what we think and what we believe. They spend a lot of time telling us what we want to hear. And the way I think change works is you need to develop a constituency that makes the world safe for a political leader to feel it's safe to say something that's beyond the pale. And that's the paradox or the oxymoron of political leadership today is, and politicians have always told me, you go into the last 6 weeks of an election and all you're doing is targeting this 8% in the middle, and you are pretending to lead by telling that 8% what they want to hear. That's how it works. And the way you change that equation is what Andy Stern, my friend who's the head of the SEIU, who I admire a lot, talks about, and I don't know if this was his phrase, but he says you have to change the wind. And changing the wind means creating bands of followers. It's why so many, of the real changes in the U.S. come from the grassroots up. It's what Obama understands. Martin Luther, the civil rights movement was not a decree from on high, obviously. There were a lot of people spilling blood in the streets for there to be change. And so what I hope what this book helps contribute is to create an army of people ready to challenge these dead ideas that makes it safe for political leaders to step out. Because if there's no constituency, an author can say this, like me, but if it's not possible to safely engage in the conversation, if the media is not ready to be supportive, you're not going to find people risking their careers to kill a dead idea. So we all have a role in making the world safe for busting these dead ideas. That's what I meant. So,
in respect to that, in the context of the change of power,
don't breathe on that microphone.
in respect to the change of power and in respect
Your ideas, and basket of ideas. And what I'm hearing with the aggressive left in this country being a bit disappointed in the Obama cabinet choices, etc. How optimistic are you that in the next, let's assume, 8 years of Obama, that we're going to see movement towards the kind of things you think that need to happen? Or do you think that the Obama, parentheses, Clinton group is going to just maybe perhaps fall into the same traps and pitfalls?
Well,
I'm very optimistic. But the proof will be in the pudding, and we'll start to find out pretty soon because we'll start to see choices made. I think it's, look, the challenge of presidential leadership in a country as raucous and diverse as this, with a media culture like this, is unbelievably hard. And yet we need great political leadership, and great political leadership invariably disappoints segments of the society at any given time. And the art of the leader's sort of constant calibration is how to keep 60-65% of the people coming behind you as you try and forge a path, and how to make sure that you're not losing people irretrievably as you try and chart a course that has to bring everyone along. You can't govern by trying to push a 20% vanguard agenda. You've got to try, and his challenge, I think, is to redefine the political center in the country, and he has an enormous opportunity to do that now because of the crisis. And if we can redefine the political center, which is so far to the right with the rest of the world, I mean, I would always tell people, I just want Margaret Thatcher-style universal health coverage. That always stymies the conservatives, when you say, can't we just have Margaret Thatcher universal-style health coverage? Because she would have been thrown from office if she had proposed anything as radically conservative as Bill Clinton's health care plan, which was obviously mocked as, socialist Armageddon here. So Obama's chance is to move the political center. Clinton wasn't able to do it. And I think crisis provides an opportunity to do that. But it may not go exactly where some people on the left want. It's going to try and pull along people who like Rick Warren. There's the art of this is really hard. And what's always sort of mysterious about political leadership is part of the art, it requires that people don't know what you really think. If you think about that it's just an interesting fact. Most of us, in our day-to-day dealings, at least with our friends and family, don't make a point routinely of hiding everything we're thinking and feeling. Political leadership actually requires that in a way that I find kind of, in fact, maybe I should do something on that because I think it's interesting. But I think it does. And so we'll see, because the choices are going to start to get made, but I think you got to give the guy a shot. If people are skeptical, or if people on the left are skeptical, I'd say give the guy a chance. Pressure him for what you want, but give him a chance.
And one quick question on...
Got to be very quick just because I want to get other people in.
Protectionism and your use of that term.
Yes.
The fact that it seems to be, in my opinion, seems to be very politically oriented during campaign seasons, and then in fact, protectionism is really nothing real anymore except when it comes to voting time. What do you think about that?
If you look at the recent campaign.
Concern. I guess I think it is a real concern because we know how serious worker anxiety is, and these forces are only going to be accelerating. And so the idea, especially when we've got a time of crisis now, that we're going to be so open to foreign competition is going to be a real issue for lots of citizens, and therefore for their elected representatives, because they're a reflection of what people are thinking. So I guess I think the threat of protectionism, which we should not want, is real. And the reason I think we shouldn't want it has to do with what the lady at the beginning said about being a global citizen. Because that's the paradox of what I think progressivism is in the U.S. Because progressives in the U.S. want to protect labor in the U.S. But if you're a progressive who's a global citizen, what does that mean? The rise of humanity elsewhere should be a fabulous thing from a progressive point of view. And it sort of depends who your constituency or your scope of moral concern is. And I think it should be global, but I think we should make sure that we are decent for folks who are affected by these changes so that we can make sure the whole thing works. Back in the corner.
Well, I think it comes full circle because
ladies talk about global citizenship. And what I wanted to refer to was the young gentleman from China used a phrase which I have always found, or increasingly found, offensive and annoying in recent years. And maybe it's because it's never been satisfactorily defined for me. And that term is the American dream. I want to know what that American dream is and how it differs from any other dreams, perhaps.
I guess
The American dream is being about upward mobility and the chance in a free society to, no matter what station you're born into, to make. Well, I think it has universal appeal. I think it's been uniquely achievable through the ages until now in the U.S. And I think it's a great risk, as you know, I've been talking about. But I think it's a universal aspiration. Well, it's a little that when I say that the kids will learn more than we do is a dead idea, I'm basically getting at that. But you're right. Might have been too much a downer though for the publisher.
With regard to
just got two more questions on
global citizenship. what do you see as Americans' role in the global community? Our financial system is like in disrepute now because of the Madoff scandal, the subprime mess. And how can we survive as a decent nation in the global community?
I think we gotta rethink a lot of things and do a lot, and we have a lot of work to do to restore our reputation and to make sound policies that will, stop this stuff from happening.
How we got to a situation where we let investment banks leverage themselves up at 35 to 40 to 1 and let executives get rich when the consequences of the stuff meant that the economy would be thrown into turmoil. I mean, that's a man-made problem. We made that ourselves through inattention or greed and neglect, and lots of people contributed to that, and we're going to have to get our act together. And I think we've taken a tremendous blow to our prestige in the global community. And the other countries aren't looking. We've been the ones who are arrogantly lecturing to the world how you should run capitalism. I think we do have a lot to contribute, obviously, because of the dynamism of our economy, but we're going to have to get our house in order in a lot of ways if we're going to be credible, and I think that's one of Obama's and now Hillary Clinton's biggest challenges. Last question, very last question, back there. And then I'm going to sign some books so I can still talk.
What about the idea that the United States has to remain the world's only military superpower or hyperpower with hundreds of bases around the world? And the corollary idea that this is necessary because of terrorism, when the contending idea is that U.S. military presence and actions recruits to terrorism. And slaying this idea will free up hundreds of billions of dollars. Are these ideas in your book?
But I think you should send them to the website, and I think that there's no question. I couldn't cover everything in one book, and I think that there's going to be a lot of scope to revisit the military stuff. I don't think, and even conservatives will tell you we're going to have to revisit the military budget and the trajectory of it. And there are aspects of our imperial reach that I think are a big problem for us and are a dead idea. But I couldn't take it all on in one book. But I would say that it won't solve our big long-term budget problems, the military stuff alone, because the magnitude of the age wave is so huge. So it won't be just that can fund all the things that some of us may want to do. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. A couple of quick announcements before you go. One is for the about the wind and the idea of we need to create the space for political leaders to lead. I was testifying before the House Financial Services Committee about a year ago on the need for public investment. It feels like ages ago. And I listed all the things that I thought ought to be governmental responsibilities, including universal health care, including a pension system that was not employer-based, including it. And one of the ranking Republican member of the committee said, well, the United States federal government, we take about 19% of GDP in taxes. Obviously, if you want us to do all these things, you want a higher level. What do you think it should go to? And my first instinct, people may know, I was in politics for 15 years, was, oh, he's not going to catch me on that one. And then I realized, no, it's exactly the role that people like you and organizations like Demos have to play, which is to push the ideas out and push the acceptable limits out. So I said, well, in the European countries, they do about 40%, and of course, apples to apples, what they provide for that is health care and paid family leave and universal child care and then education, a much cheaper educational system and all those things. He said, so you want us to be like France and Sweden. And